As the weather warms and the holidays beckon, a lot of us are going to be thinking about a great summer escape. And atop of a lot of lists is a trip to the treasure that sits off our south coast, Kangaroo Island. Today, it's a quick and comfortable ferry ride to the internationally famous delights that KI has to offer. But it hasn't always been that way. This is the Karata, and from 1907 until 1961, this vessel was the major link between the island and the mainland. It was primarily a freighter, but there was a large saloon for day passengers. It sailed twice a week from Port Adelaide. Until the storm of 1948 turned the Glenelg jetty into kindling, it would stop there 2 hours after leaving the port to pick up passengers who had made their way to the bay on the tram. This film was shot in the 1950s when the Karata sailed into a ferocious storm on its way back to the mainland. The trip normally took 7 hours. On this day, it took almost 16. With more demand for freight and island tourism on the rise, the Karata was pensioned off and a purpose-built vessel took over the run. When the motor vessel Trowbridge was commissioned in 1961, it was a really big deal because gone were those laborious, painstaking hours of loading everything on and off the Karata by crane. Instead, at this wharf behind me, it was simply rolled on and rolled off. But even though loading and offloading was quicker, the trip to and from the island was still slow. And you couldn't even say the Trowbridge was built for comfort and not for speed because it didn't handle the rough seas all that well and earned the dubious nickname of the Spew Bridge. It was also having trouble making money and was taken over by the state government in 1972. Trowbridge sailed the triangular route between Kangaroo Island, Port Lincoln and Port Adelaide until 1987. By the way, it finished its life as an island ferry in Malta and Turkey. Its replacement was the Island Seaway. It was much bigger than the Trowbridge with more area dedicated to vehicles, but fewer for tourists. Again, the service struggled to make ends meet, and the state government finally ran out of patience and money in 1995, and the ship was sold. Again, that wound up in Malta. And whilst these larger vessels were connecting the island with the mainland, a fleet of smaller ferries was also shuttling people to and from. And, just like the big guys, many also struggled to remain viable. The wooden Philandra 1 sailed between American River and Cape Jarvis from 1970 to 1972 before that service was abandoned. The Islander went from Kings Cope and the Cape from 1980 to 1982 before that was also withdrawn. More recently, the Superflight lasted just 3 years in the mid-1990s, trying to make money on a run from Glenelg to Kingscote. And in 2004, the service from Wirrana Cove to Kingscote, run by Kangaroo Island Ferry Service, lasted just 5 months. Thankfully, the people behind the failed Philandra tried again in early 1980 with Philandra 2, because this time they made it work. And that was the birth of the ferry service that now carries the SeaLink brand. What we have today is a far cry from the early days, especially with the new multi-million-dollar terminals at Penneshaw and Cape Jarvis. But what hasn't changed is the magic that always draws us back to wonderful Kangaroo Island.
The vineyards are looking absolutely superb at the moment. The leaves are out and the bunches of grapes are forming. And with the holiday season fast approaching, you should consider visiting one of our many cellar doors. And if you do, why not look at one that also has a great garden?
In this month's magazine, I'll take you to the Adelaide Hills, where guests can wander the stunning grounds of Barrett's Winery when they call in for a taste. And today, I'm in the Barossa Valley at Grant Burge Wines, because I've heard that Helen Burge has been working on a new garden, and it's part of a project which adds a whole new dimension to their historic property.
Helen, why is it so important for you to have gardens around the winery areas?
Well, we have the three areas which ends up as one precinct. Mm-hmm. We've got the cellar door, our homestead, and the Meshack cellar, which is for VIPs, and we actually end up with all the lawns and everything for people to sit on and have a drink and a schnitter and a bit of food. So it's a whole experience of not just wine, but food and the gardens as well.
The Burges have been making wine in the Barossa for 5 generations. Their cellar door sits in the foothills at the top of Crondorf Road, and because of its elevation, has a wonderful panorama of the valley. And it's open 7 days a week.
The cellar door and the homestead garden is pretty well established, but this really is a work in progress in a vineyard.
It certainly is a work in progress, Michael. We actually put the agapanthus all around the lawn area itself because we don't want people in the vineyard because of phylloxera.
Also, you've got some fabulous trees like the old fig tree.
The old fig tree. They wanted to cut it down on me, Michael, and I wouldn't let them cut it down.
And this is probably a long-term vision. You've done some other plantings as well.
I certainly have. We've got a beautiful rose garden at the end of the car park area.
When these gardens mature, visitors to the state-of-the-art Meshack cellar will feel like they're in a Barossa Valley vineyard. And that's the whole idea. The function centre itself is a wonderful mix of old and new. And that's quite fitting because it was literally reincarnated from rubble.
Well, it started by being a ruin, Michael, but it was always the P.T. Falkenberg's original winery in the 1800s. For 35 years we've been saying we've got to build onto it, we've got to do something with it. And eventually we did something with it and we built a front onto the old winery itself.
You could almost say the best address in the Barossa Valley.
Well, we think so, Michael.
That is a beautiful Barossa Valley view. This room is not always open, but it can be booked by small groups for a wine experience that includes the iconic Grant Burge back vintage wines, like this Meshack. Now, that is very special.
Next, Adelaide's Feast of Fashion at the Art Gallery.